What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Valley coming at you with another mailbag episode, going at it solo, as we tend to do with mailbags over here. Best way to join in on the mailbag fun, by the way, join our Discord. The link to that is in the podcast and YouTube description. You can also email us, hardwoodknocks@gmail.com. That is in the podcast and YouTube description as well. Those are the best ways, though. Come join our Discord. If you don't have Discord, email is fine, but if you have Discord, come join. Lots of good conversations happening there. Very quick reminder before we get started, just remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the sub button on YouTube, like, comment, help the algo love us back, and subscribe on Apple and Spotify predominantly, or wherever you get your podcasts. Ratings and reviews on Apple and Spotify help us out a ton as well. And so we're trying to use both to get to 500 ratings. So please, whether you use it or not, just take the time. It's 10 seconds out of your day. Go write a quick review. We really appreciate it. You can follow us on the socials. That's on the screen or in the podcast description. And that is it. You can support the show with merch as well, or tell people about us. We really do appreciate when people do that. Before we do dive into the mailbag, I will have, we'll get to some news. Grant and I will do this. I think we'll have an episode going up on Thursday. This is going up on Wednesday morning. So we'll hit some more injury notes, LaMelo Ball, more news like that. Warriors suffered a bunch of injuries on Tuesday night, but I thought there were two that were worth talking about here. We'll start with Mark Cuban sold a majority stake in the Dallas Mavericks. They were valuated at $3.5 billion. Now, to be clear, by him selling a majority stake, I'm assuming that means he's selling at least 50.1%. And so he's not getting $3.5 billion. He is still, let's just assume he's going to sell half. So we're at 1.75 billion, just using that as a flat number. He initially bought his stake for 285 million, I believe. He's clearing a lot of money here. He is selling it to Miriam Adelson. She's from the family of she is a Las Vegas billionaire, and she is a majority stakeholder, I believe, in Las Vegas Sands. She is liquidating about $2 billion worth of the company's stock in the Las Vegas Sands Corp. That's about 10% of her stake in the company. And that's to fund the purchase of this. Now, what's interesting about this is Mark Cuban is going to retain he is considered, again, the primary stakeholder in the Dallas Mavericks. And he's been that for basically 25 years at this point. He is selling his significant stake, but, and this is all pending league approval, it is expected to be vetted. However, he would retain a stake in the franchise, and he would also retain operational control of all the team's basketball dealings, as Mark Stein framed it on his Substack. That's a pretty huge friggin' deal. What's also interesting about this is that Cuban has been among the most outspoken advocates for casino gaming. I don't even want to say expansion in Texas, but wants, casino gaming to happen in Texas. He believes it would make it more of a tourist destination than it is right now. And he has talked about how he has dreams of sort of opening a Dallas Mavericks arena that has a casino attached. And now the fact that he is selling to someone who is so involved in the Las Vegas Sands Corp, who a company that has been kind of at the forefront of, if you go and look and read some of the stuff, when you talk about Texas and casino gaming and sports gambling, they're a company that is routinely mentioned. So I don't know that this portends anything about the future of casino or sports gambling in Texas. All the stuff you read says that it's not really a priority. And there's the whole Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who remains vehemently against it. I just find it a little interesting that this is the person that he is selling it to. We will see if it goes through to Miriam Adelson. Again, it is expected to go through. It just feels like it's an interesting sale, interesting timing as well. But he is selling at the peak of where these franchises are getting valuations at. I think the Mavericks were, by Forbes, the seventh most expensive or lucrative franchise in the NBA at the start of this season. And so he is capitalizing on that financial investment, securing part of his own future, but still just retaining operational control, which is great news for Dwight Powell, who will, I'm assuming, get a lifetime deal from the Dallas Mavericks after this season. That's really about it for now. We have to wait and see if more details will come up, but I'm very curious to see how this setup really works. I want to know how much of a stake he is selling, how much of a stake is he retaining. And I want to know, like, does this one, the casino stuff is semi interesting to me. It's an inevitability in every state. I'd say the vast majority of states. There are 38 states now, I believe, that have some form of legal sports betting. And when you look at just casino gaming and sports betting, there are maybe one, two, three, four states that you could argue will never have sports betting or something. It feels like an inevitability everywhere else. And so that is interesting. Does this portend anything to happen with the future of casino gambling in Texas? I have no idea. Does it say anything about Mark Cuban's plans, though? You would think it certainly does if he's selling a quote unquote significant stake in this team that he's been synonymous with essentially since he bought it. And he is probably the highest profile owner in the league. I know that Steve Ballmer gets a lot of shine, and then you kind of have James Dolan and Jerry Reinsdorf as, owners that are lampooned a lot by the public. And there's Joe Lacob, of course, but he's kind of just like, and part of that is Shark Tank and how he made his money and how he doesn't, I don't know how to frame this part, but like he is courtside at every game and he's a jeans and t-shirt kind of guy. And so people think that they can relate to him, even though, I mean, that's frankly, they really can't. Just, I find it interesting on so many levels. We'll see if the setup works, but I think this is most interesting because it has to say something about Cuban's future with the team. He might retain operational control, but he's 65. Does he plan on doing this long term? Do a lot of people use this? Oh, are they worried about Luka leaving and he just wants to get out while the getting is good? I guess you could galaxy brain it that way. I find it more interesting on the level of what are his long term plans, and then two, does this say anything about the future of, again, casino gambling in Texas, sports gambling as well? The other piece of news, we already talked about the Josh Giddey stuff when it first came out. The Newport Beach Police Department is now officially investigating these allegations against him that surfaced on social media, and the Thunder are still playing him. He played on Tuesday night. The Timberwolves fans in the arena booed him every time he touched the ball. They cheered when he did something really poorly. There was also Andrew Bogut was talking on a podcast about how apparently, I don't know that I want to give this credence just because it's Andrew Bogut, a reliable source, but he had said that Giddey was lied to about the minor's age, and that as soon as he found out, he seized contact with her, told the Thunder organization, and like that was kind of that until now, I guess. That's unacceptable. If it's true, then that's all of a sudden sanctioned by the league and the Thunder, and we don't ever hear anything about it. And now because it's, I guess, the Thunder at least being consistent by not disciplining him now or telling him to be away from the team or making him a healthy scratch. By not doing that, that's what they did apparently when they found out. I don't like speculating on this, and there's a minor involved. I would say that even if the minor lied about her age, if this happened over a year ago, which is what Andrew Bogut, I believe, said, what kind of freshman or sophomore looks the part of an 18 or 19-year-old? That's just willful ignorance at best, I would claim it. We just need to wait for more details coming out. I'm not going to ignore it entirely because I think it's important to talk about, but I don't want to get into speculating and automatically calling him a scumbag without knowing the details. I will say that it is just a terrible look right now for the organization by probably playing him. I don't know who they're doing any favors for. He didn't look good against Minnesota to begin with. And these allegations are serious enough that we've had similar situations where there are not similar allegations necessarily, but there have been allegations against players where they have been dispatched away from the team. And is it because we don't have, I mean, I guess there was video evidence out there, but the lack of concreteness or of a police report before this, is that just why they're keeping him around? Do they know something about this that we don't? Again, I'm really, the part of me, the most concerning part about this for me is one, I like just talking about someone who is a minor and that we've seen that her information has been doxed a bunch on the internet. And then just also the lack of, like, even by the NBA standards where everything can be very cryptic when you're looking at kind of, we're going to wait and see more from the Miles Bridges stuff or the Josh Primo stuff or the Kevin Porter Jr. stuff, just to name some of the more recent incidents. It's just, there were still details and reporting kind of trickling out. There hasn't been a lot of follow-up reporting on this. And I know the Thunder are a very buttoned up organization. The fact that this was kept under wraps, though, maybe for a year, is just also wildly uncomfortable. We'll see how it plays out. He is currently a member of the, he's not being a healthy scratch right now. Does it ever get to that point? We don't know. What does the investigation from the Newport Police Department find? I will say, though, just based off the fact that it has now been elevated to an official law enforcement capacity, which again, if the Thunder knew about this at the time, like, shouldn't there have been something done with actual law enforcement to put this officially on the record if they were truly, even Giddey himself cared about doing the right thing? And maybe they did and we don't know about it. But the fact that this has now been elevated, and this is just, I'm not a lawyer. Maybe we'll ask Grant about this, because Grant is, I don't know if anyone knows this, Grant's a lawyer. My co-host Grant, for anyone who's watching or listening for the first time, we can ask him about this. I'm not a lawyer, but the fact that this has now been elevated to an official legal matter, I don't really understand why he's playing. And it's not just a matter of the Thunder need and the league need to show that they're doing something. I don't know who is benefiting from having him play at the moment. Again, though, the lack of details leaves so many things open for interpretation, and that's pretty toxic in itself, just that ambiguity there when you look at the social media commentary on it. And the final thing I'll say on this is adjacent to the fact people going after ESPN's Malika Andrews for how she covered the Josh Giddey situation versus the Brandon Miller draft comments that she made. I watched the clips that were put up and I think the other one was a Miles Bridges one, the third one that was up there, maybe it was Kevin Porter Jr. They're all the same clip. She's just doing her job and relaying the facts as we know them, and maybe adding some intel from things that she has heard in every instance. And just people are telling on themselves as bigots, as dipshits, as misogynists when they're claiming that she is treating Josh Giddey differently because he's white. Now, is that happening within the media in general? Is he getting more of the benefit of the doubt than a KPJ, than a Miles Bridges did? I can't speak to that. It's certainly possible because of the way that racial bias just works in this country. I just don't think it's fair to single out Malika Andrews, of all people, a black sports media member, for covering this differently when it's just there's video evidence of it being the exact same thing. Her restating facts is not communicating an opinion or ethering or ruining a moment. She didn't go on air during the draft and talk about how Brandon Miller was, scum of the earth, even though he wasn't, I guess, directly involved in the murder case. She's just restating that he was like a person that was named in that case. And she did the same thing here with Josh Giddey. And so there's been consistency in that. And I understand if there's critiques on how the overall commentary is forming. I already do not like what we're seeing on social media. Again, this comes back to the just absurd ambiguity we're dealing with here, where these allegations are made and we just know nothing after the fact, aside from now that they're being investigated. And this hearsay from Andrew Bogut, who had said on the thing, which is why I'm even kind of uncomfortable talking. Maybe I shouldn't have given it credence, but I want to make sure that we're at least tackling it, where he said that if I'm wrong, I will apologize. If you're not 100% sure, maybe you shouldn't say anything, which is why maybe I shouldn't even have talked about what Andrew Bogut said. Maybe that's not fair. Maybe that's not fair to Giddey or the alleged minor involved here. It's not really fair to anyone. So if anyone's offended by that, I apologize, but that's what's floating around. Now you're seeing on social media talking about how Giddey is in fact the victim, and that just reaches a whole other level of toxicity. We need to wait and see a resolution here. I do think, though, because the police are officially involved in at least some capacity, I feel like Josh Giddey just shouldn't be with the team at the moment. Like, just even if it turns out that he somehow is, I don't even want to use the word victim in all this. He was just unknowing and didn't technically do anything wrong. Like, just pull him off the court right now, subjecting to what his teammates are going to have to deal with, what he has to deal with from the crowds, the distractions that it kind of creates. I would think in the arena, they're not talking about it openly on broadcast. Just not a fan of how this is handled at all, especially if it's been something that's been ongoing for over a year. Again, we don't know the full details, the danger of me commenting on it without actually knowing that. I will say this, as usual, to be brutally honest, there is no natural segue into actual basketball, but let's talk about basketball. We'll begin with the in-season tournament. Is topical, and Austin had a question. What's happening with the in-season tournament? Pacers are undefeated and clinched the game at home. Also, there are 6 teams making it through, and who plays who? East A winner versus West A, or all East versus East. Then championship is East versus West. So, yeah, the crux of it, look, the rules are just, there are 8 teams that advance. They have already advanced to the knockout rounds. Every team that has the best standing in like one of the 6 groups, they advance. And then there were 2 wild cards that came from, so let's just talk about the West. You have your groups, and the winner of each groups then advances. There are then 2 wild cards from the West that are going to be chosen. They were chosen by the best record, with the tiebreaker being point differential from there. I know a lot of people thought that if you're going outside the group, yeah, inside the group, the tiebreaker should be point differential. A lot of people want to see that the tiebreaker should be overall record on the season, just because you're dealing with outside groups. That's okay. I get it. The matchups have been solidified, though, however, after Tuesday night. And so we have the Suns at Lakers, the Pelicans at the Kings, the Knicks at the Bucks, and the Celtics at the Pacers. And so four teams from each conference. We are now entering a single elimination territory. The schedule is, I believe, they're going to play December Monday, so December 4th, and Tuesday, December 5th. So those are going to be those two subsets of games. And then there'll be a semifinals and the a championship. And on those nights, as far as I can tell, because the NBA released a subsequent schedule, on these single elimination nights or the championship round, those are the only games that are taking place. The actual championship is on Saturday, December 9th, I believe, which would mean that the semifinals are going to be on Thursday, December 6th. If I'm misstating that, I do apologize, but I'm pretty sure I did double check before I came on here and started rambling that I am correct. And yeah, so there's a smorgasbord of games on Wednesday the 6th and Friday the 8th. And those are the other 22 teams that missed the quarterfinal round of the in-season tournament. So um that is really just how it's working. And yeah, it is December 7th is when the semifinals are taking place. So we will have the first knockout round where on December 4th and 5th, where those four games are taking place. Then on December 7th, we will have another pair of games that will yield two teams remaining that will then play on December 9th. Now, the semifinals and the championship. So those final two sets of games, December 7th, which is a Thursday, and December 9th, which is a Saturday, excuse me, those will be taking place in Las Vegas. And I do think, look, it's interesting. The point differential became a thing when we were watching these games. It was, let's look at the last one, the Golden State Kings one. If Golden State won by 12 plus, they would advance. But if the Kings lost by 11 or fewer, or just one, they would advance. They ended up actually winning, let alone erasing a large deficit. Golden State did have injuries to GP2 and Chris Paul, but they were just absolutely kind of just a pathetic effort at points with the way they were turning the ball over. A lot of fouls, though, in that game. And I thought some of them went bad against the Warriors in the second half specifically. Still, that was just, they had such a big lead. There's no excuse for blowing that. So that's really just how it works. You are staying in the same conference until you get to the championship, and then it's East versus West. I hope that answers your question, Austin. I hope just the end of it kind of clarified this a little bit for you. I still find the point differential stuff interesting because of what it kind of did. There were games within a games where, look at Boston versus Chicago. The outcome was already, we knew Boston was going to win, but they were trying to drive up the score to change the context of their placement in the in-season tournament. And I like that stuff. I do think that if you went to a tiebreaker, some people have argued this for the entire season, looking at that record, I guess it would increase the meaning of regular season games overall. So I would be open to that idea, but I kind of like this. It made it chaotic and really tough to follow, where I wanted to laser in on OKC and Minnesota. And that's the early game that I focused on. I guess not, that it was at 8 o'clock Eastern time. So it's kind of in the second wave, but that's the game I wanted to zero in on. But you're also kind of checking scores elsewhere. And it's always like that to some extent, but I do find it easier when it wasn't in this situation to kind of just focus on that singular game or two games. And so that made it chaotic, but that's part of this, and it's fun. We'll see if it takes. I really do think that that it's been a victory for its first year. I'm more intrigued to see if we fast forward 3, 4, 5 years down the line, is there more meaning ascribed to actually winning it, to this entire process of it. We've heard coaches talk about it. We've heard players kind of talk about it. Some of them have been against it at points, where Tatum and DeRozan were both sort of belaboring the point differential thing. My advice would just be play better then, if you're worried about other teams scoring when you're already down a ton. That's my whole thing. Like, just play better from the jump, and you're not in that situation. Those minutes can actually matter. So I actually love the point differential tiebreaker, just because of what it did to the final night of games, and what you're not just paying attention to the outcome, you're paying attention to the types of outcomes. Makes it complex to follow. And I will fully admit, I wasn't necessarily tracking the in-season tournament standings throughout the entire year and the point differential in different scenarios and stuff. I kind of waited for it to play out, monitored it in real time. That was more me just going through the inaugural motions of this entire thing. And I think if this catches on, you'll be more invested in the standings of the point differential standing specifically before these games even take place. I think it's been for its debut year overall, I do think it's been a very good experience. So that's where I'm at with that. We can now move on to non in season tournament stuff. And we have a pair of Knicks questions. One of them is Knicks adjacent. This is from, let's start with the one from Austin again. Should the Grizz trade for Mitchell Robinson? The blocking of him and Triple J would be insane. Plus, they would get back that rebounding machine they are missing right now with Steven Adams. So, yeah, I mean, if Mitchell Robinson is available, I would say the Grizzlies should, excuse me, it's late here. I'm yawning. Should absolutely take a look at him. They're not necessarily outfitted in disposable salary, though. I mean, when you start to name the players that have to go out to match, Mitchell Robinson does not make a ton, and you just run into this problem with any trade. He's making 15.7 this year. That declines to 14.3 next year. Then the final year is under 13 after that, which is pretty wild. And so that's just going to increase the value of his contract, the fact that it's declining. But so are they giving up Steven Adams' expiring deal in that? Are they giving up Brandon Clark? Why would the Knicks want his contract when he's coming back from an Achilles injury and signed for multiple years? What else are you attaching it to make it worth the Knicks' while? I can't see Mitchell Robinson actually being available right now unless it's in a superstar trade. He is too important to what the Knicks do, especially on offense. They are a team that I believe that they've improved a little bit when you're looking at their shooting percentages from short, mid range, and at the rim, but they've been bad enough in those spots specifically that they need what Mitchell Robinson is bringing to the table. And so they're still dead last in rim percentage, 57.8%. They're shooting 39% on twos between 4 and 14 feet. That ranks 28th. And now, so you look at what Mitchell Robinson is doing, and he is grabbing rebounds on 23.6% of their 2-point misses and 16.2% of their 3-point misses. When you look at that short mid-range area and rim area specifically, he's grabbing 20.6% of their misses at the rim and 21.1% of their misses from short mid-range. He's grabbing 34.1 actually of their long mid-range misses, 15% of their above the break 3 misses, and 19.3% of their, I'm actually looking at the wrong one. He's grabbing 27.7% of their misses at the rim and 25.6% of their misses between 4 and 14 feet. That's a gargantuan number when you consider how poorly the Knicks are faring from those ranges. The other thing is second chance points are just a huge part of what the Knicks are doing offensively in general. When Mitchell Robinson is on the court, and I did cite this on the previous podcast, but it's part of this mailbag question. The Knicks are averaging, when they have a second chance possession, they're averaging about 1.1 points per possession with Mitchell Robinson on the floor. That drops to 0.92 points per possession when he's off the floor. That's a massive drop off. And so he's just too important to the way that they're faring right now. And I don't think that you'd be willing to trade him unless it's part of a megastar package. Because one, your season, if the season was going down the toilet, he wasn't playing that well, maybe you could talk yourself into, the Grizzlies send salary and then a bunch of picks. That's not where the Knicks are at right now. And they don't need Mitchell Robinson's probably more valuable than most of the picks the Grizzlies could send back at this point anyway. And so if you're trying to load for a superstar trade, you don't trade your best defender right now. And who's been, again, one of your most valuable offensive players just for the offensive rebounding. He's improved his hand coordination on the offensive end this year too. For the Grizzlies specifically, his screening just isn't what Steven Adams brings. And so that there'd be some difference there. There's no doubt though that having him on the glass would help a crap ton. I think they're kind of looking at, you'd have to go the route of cheaper flyers, I would think, or players who are materially different, where it's like, could you go after a Nick Claxton if the Nets don't want to pay him in advance of free agency and he's making $9.6 million right now? He, again, is not the screener that Steven Adams is, not the rebounder either, but super switchable, and is going to give you a huge defensive impact. And he has some ball skills on the offensive end. Or do you go, all right, I think a lot of people have mentioned Vooch for them. That'd be interesting. Getting to the money's a little bit tough. for them. Do you want to give up, excuse me, Steven Adams in that deal? If it's a matter of Brandon Clark and other salary, I guess maybe, but Vooch is not having the best year right now. And he has another 2 years left on his contract at 41.5 million total. After this one, you might be better off if the Bulls tear it down. Hey, there's Andre Drummond just on his minimum contract. Can you get him? And that's another big body, someone who would help you on the glass for sure. Do you look at what's happening in Dallas? Do you just wind up taking a flyer on just the rusty Rashawn Holmes to see if that could work out? Would they consider trading the ultra cheap Dwight Powell at this point? Detroit has plenty of bigs. I don't know that they would want any of them in Memphis. Um, Houston, no, nothing there. Could you look at the Knicks have Jericho Sims? Could he be someone that they would consider moving? Again, that's just a much different archetype of a player than Steven Adams is if you're just looking to replace him, um, you know, skill for skill. And you could go with, look, is OKC willing to finally, let's roll out Poku at the 5 in Memphis just to see what happens. They have a Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren there. They will play some Kenrich at the 5. Ousmane Dieng has kind of fallen out of the rotation a little bit. He did have a stint in the G League, so maybe his minutes tick up after that. Would you play him at the 5? So you can get creative that route. There's not a lot of, a healthy Robert Williams III would have been interesting. He is not healthy, though. You're not, even if you can get the money for DeAndre, and that's not going to be something that interests you. The Spurs are not just going to get rid of Zach Collins. You go with sort of a flyer on, again, a very different player, but like just see, hey, Chris Boucher, he has only 1 year in his contract after this one. Do we just take a flyer on him? You could also go a little bit smaller and see, does Thaddeus Young tickle their fancy at all? Utah has Kelly Olynyk, which is super interesting if they want to go that route. Stretches the floor, can help you on the glass a little bit, but he's not like this screening big, and he's also just not this excellent rebounder either. And so that doesn't necessarily fit the bill. Daniel Gafford in Washington, maybe if you're talking about the screening, but when you look at a lot of what the Grizzlies need to replace from Steven Adams, I don't necessarily know if he's going to give you. He gives you some on the defensive glass. He's had an offensive rebounding rate over 12, or excuse me, over 11 in each of the past 4 years. So that's something like, do you take a look at him? But again, we're talking about someone, he is not expensive by any stretch. But because of the salary structure that the Grizzlies are working with, getting to his 12.4 million, you're saying essentially, are we trading Luke Kennard? Are we trading Steven Adams himself? Are we trading Brandon Clark? You can't even step ladder. It would take like 3 other players to step ladder your way there after you go from that. And so that would be a weird decision to make. Do you chase good money after bad? That saying goes, because your season's so far gone right now. I think any move of this caliber, or any move of significance, kind of has to wait until a little bit after John Morant comes back, and that's not going to give you a much time to evaluate the team, but you want to make sure that you're going to start winning with him enough to justify going all in to this. Well, not all in, but to justify, you want to say doubling down. It's not like a triple down, but to reinvest in this season's core. And to make a move that, if it's Drummond, you could probably, that's a little bit easier to work. Someone who's making that type of, or a Jericho Sims. But if you're talking about someone who's making around the mid-level, even a little bit less, like it's going to cost you a player that you probably want Steven Adams around beyond this season, even though he's not healthy right now, or Brandon Clark, if you're banking on him returning from his Achilles injury. That makes the decision a little tougher, and is why I think you would need to wait until John Morant comes back. Sticking with, this is specific to the Knicks, Boxboy71. I think the Knicks should make a move to sign Pascal Siakam. At first glance, it sounds like a lateral move, but I think Pascal makes the Knicks a better team, both defensively and holistically, while providing similar offensive production as Randall. I think if they are going to pay a player $40 million in the next few years, I would rather have Pascal. They could trade Randall for picks and a backup 3 or 4. I just feel the ceiling of a team with Randall is capped at the second, without him ever becoming a concerned defender. Pascal's style of play and acceptance as a second or third star just makes him a better fit for this team's future. That is interesting. Any Pascal deal, first of all, is going to need to begin with a sign and trade. The Knicks are just not projected to have cap space next year. You can always go about clearing it, but it's not a matter of just, let's take Julius Randle is on the books for 27.6 million. It's not just, oh, let's trade him and we'll have enough money to go out and sign Pascal Siakam. As of right now, when you look at just next season, there are holds baked in here, assuming they pick up the team option on Jericho Sims. You're looking at 150 plus $1 million in salary against a $142 million cap. So they're like a net, they're already 10 million ish over the cap. So it has to be a sign and trade almost, unless you're just dumping player after player. That's not even including Evan Fournier as a team option. So we're not even including his money in those calculations. Now, is that feasible? Sure. What the Knicks also need to consider is that Jalen Brunson is extension eligible after this season. And so he can extend off of 140% of his current deal. And so that's someone that you need to start thinking about in the sense of just ballparking this year. If you're going to pay him $35 million a year to start, does he accept it? One, because of how well he's playing, and this is his age 27 season, so he'll be going into age 28. He could probably kick it another year and then wait for his player option and then just, enter the market that way and get a higher starting salary. But if you're going to pay him that money, I don't know if the route is then to go, oh, let's pay Pascal Siakam his max or close to it. And now you have, all right, these guys are still in their prime, but Pascal Siakam will be going into his age 30 season next year. And then you have Jalen Brunson going into his age 28. It's just, you're kind of like supercharging the urgency of your timeline. And I don't know if Brunson and Siakam are enough to build a contender. I would be intrigued if you had enough shooting around them, because Siakam, I think, is a fantastic player. This year, however, he's still shooting just 41.7% on drives. He's at 28.3% on catch and shoot threes, including 23.1% over his last 5 games. You need to give him spacing. And Jalen Brunson has become one of the best off the dribble 3-point shooters in the league this year. And so he might count as a floor spacer. But if you're going to play Siakam at the 4, which you probably would, I think you can get by with some minutes with him at the 5, not necessarily the rebounder or like the strong, huge body to play that position every minute of every game, but you can get away with Siakam at the 5 minutes. I don't think that's the Knicks' end game, especially with Tibbs, who always wants their traditional rim protector there. So if you're playing with Mitchell Robinson, you need caps lock 3 shooters around them. And I'm going to count Jalen Brunson as one. Getting to the rest of that is, okay, so is it Grimes and Quickly? Just because RJ Barrett, not necessarily a proven shooter. He's still shooting well from 3 overall in the season, but we've seen a bit of a pullback since he came back from his knee injury. That's a real concern. And so I don't necessarily love that setup. And what else are you giving up to get Siakam? So you're going to pay him, and now you also have to give up assets. Julius Randle has to be part of that deal, because none of these, like those two together, just with Brunson, and Mitchell Robinson, they just don't make any sense. Is Toronto going to be willing to take on Randle? He will be an expiring contract at that point. And so because he has a player option for $29.5 million in 25-26, maybe you think he picks that up. It's a small enough percentage of the salary cap that maybe he doesn't. So you need to find a team that values Randle. And Randle can be a very useful player. But I don't think that you're going to get net positive value for him just because of how up and down he is on both ends of the floor, and especially defensively. I want to know what team right now is going to give you a first-round pick for Julius Randle. There are teams that maybe could use him. I've seen some Detroit Pistons fans were lusting after him. You're not getting a Detroit first-round pick for that. And so that makes things tough. But let's just say that you can use him as the salary anchor. You still need to give up more money and players. And at that point, like, okay, if it costs you Grimes, is it going to cost you Barrett? Is it going to cost you Dante DiVincenzo? And then how many firsts on top of that? With Quickly's deal coming up as well, he's going to be a restricted free agent. I don't necessarily love the fit. The Knicks are kind of getting to a point, though, where it's so hard to improve their team because they have such a quality core in place that Jonathan Macri of Knicks Film School wrote about this on a Substack recently. In other years, it was so obvious where the improvement needed to come from or what they could do. And in some ways, that persists because you look at it as they just need this bigger wing. It's just different now because it's not a matter of we're going to stop playing Evan Fournier or we're going to go trade for someone like a Derrick Rose. It doesn't have to be a star, or we're going to stop playing Derrick Rose, which is something that happened for them last year. And so the absence of that obvious move makes it really difficult for the Knicks. Their next swing is going to be mission critical, and it has to be big. I don't know if Siakam is big enough. I don't necessarily love the fit with him and Brunson and Robinson. I think those three, fine, let's work with it. But then you need to make sure that you have two really above average shooters around them, basically at all points when they're on the court. I don't know if the Knicks have the juice to get there. They have Quickly, they have Grimes, they have Dante DiVincenzo. There are things you could work out there. Does RJ Barrett progress by the end of the year into that? Okay, then maybe let's take a look at it. I also just don't love the idea of Pascal Siakam playing next to such offensively limited centers. I would almost be more interested in seeing him play alongside a Jaren Jackson Jr. What does the rebounding look like with that? He needs someone maybe more like a cat next to him. Are you getting enough defense out of that? Because then Siakam is just effectively, okay, you have to play a lot of the five in those instances. The fit gets really, really tough. And if he is going to play next to another big who's not necessarily a shooter, I would argue that big needs to have a ton of ball skills. And then Pascal Siakam will be the one dotting up. And so maybe, a Zion Williamson, that fit I don't even love. Embiid would even make more sense than a Robinson up front with him. And then Chet Holmgren just kind of staring at him in OKC. Victor Wembanyama, not a center, but in San Antonio. We're putting him next to his Zach Collins. Like that's the type of Miles Turner, even. That's why the Pacers are mentioned as such a like a popular destination for him, because that just makes so much sense. And like you could probably even get, or you need to put him on a team where, all right, we'll just play him at the five and it'll be fine. Like Boston would be a good example. They can play him at the five. They can play him next to KP. That's not, I'd be shocked if that's they could use another big, but imagine if they just decided, oh, we're going to move away from over the offseason. Like Jaylen Brown's all of a sudden in Toronto, or we're going Al Horford and Derek White or whatever. But like, that's like, he needs those types of bigs around him. And if they're not, like I said, if they're not going to be these shooters, they need to at least have ball skills, and that's just not Mitchell Robinson's game. So I don't love the fit. However, I would be open to it if the price, the opportunity cost in terms of assets is reasonable. So you're getting off of Randall, and then you're just able to have enough shooting around those three of Robinson, Siakam, or Brunson. I would also say that, do I want to upend both, Robinson and Randall, getting rid of both those guys, let's say, for Pascal Siakam? Not necessarily the same deal, but you're getting Pascal Siakam. You're saying, okay, well, now we need to change the way we're going at center. Maybe Isaiah Hartenstein is starting, or we're just going to go after a different type of five. I don't think Pascal Siakam is worth doing that, but it is an interest. I don't hate the idea of Box Boy 71. I'm very particular about how it have to work, which makes me think that it won't work. I am operating at a less than banner pace right now. Let's see how many more questions I can fit in the hour. This is a really good one from Pito. What do you think about the concept / theory that the lack of spacing is the reason behind Zion not getting as many foul calls when driving to the rim? This theory says that the collapsing into the paint of the opposing teams would kind of quote unquote hide the fouls occurring on Zion from referees. So I buy into the lack of spacing limiting the playmaking that Zion can make in these driving situations. The fouling just feels more about some of his takeoff points on drives this year. Also, and like kind of the speed at which he's operating, but in general, just he is such a unique build that he's tough to referee in the same way that LeBron can be tough to referee, where bodies bounce off him and it doesn't seem like it's a ton of contact because he's just so massive, such this pristine physical specimen. And I think those players are, even if I want to call them hard to officiate, maybe that's just giving some of the refs a pass. It's going to inherently make them have to, it's going to force them to operate against more contact. Now, what I get more concerned about when I look at his drives is he's up to the volume in basically all of his years in the league that he's actually played. But the playmaking has never been like caps lock good. And so let's go back to his rookie season, 6.5 drives per 36 minutes, got fouled on 11.3% of them, passed 23.5% of the time, had 10 turnovers to 2 assists. Go to 2021. And again, we're talking about limited samples in some of these seasons because of injuries. But 14 drives per 36 minutes, got fouled on 11.8% of them, passed on almost 30% of them, still had more turnovers, 63, than assists. Doesn't play in 2021, 2022. In his limited sample during 22-23, 17.7 drives per 36 minutes, got fouled on 11.9% of them, a career high, passed on 26.2% of them, had 45 turnovers to 25 assists. This year, he's averaging almost 20 drives per 36 minutes. That foul rate has now dropped to 9.3%. He's passing 26.4% of the time, has 17 turnovers to 12 assists. He has never had an assist rate higher, I think, than 7.7 on drives. I think that more so speaks to the lack of shooting around him, because it means that guys are not capitalizing on the assist opportunities. It also means that the traffic he's dealing with will impact his passes. And this year specifically, he has more bad pass turnovers than lost ball turnovers for the first time. I think overall, the traffic hurts in the sense that it can impact his handle as well. I don't know if it's the reason for him not getting to the foul line, quote unquote, enough. I would think that has more to do just about his build and the way that there might just be this intrinsic bias against those types of players where he can withstand more contact, or maybe meaningful contact doesn't actually look like much contact because of how he's built. It is an interesting theory, though, because if there are so many bodies around him, and we've seen this how many times this year where he's like triple or quadruple teamed, it seems like. And so are is that amount of bodies sort of obfuscating some of the actual fouls that are taking place? It's an interesting theory. I don't know that I buy it, but it is certainly something that I guess could be at play. Again, he is such a unique player, one of one, unlike anyone I've ever really watched here. Kind of just like Shaq with wheels would be like how I kind of like, with a handle and wheels. I don't know if that's the most apt description of him, and so that's just by default a difficult player to referee, or someone who's going to have to deal with more contact. Pito has another question here, uh, and it's another very interesting one, and it was one I had to think about. And I want to make sure I differentiated from what our Discord members were responding to. Which, by the way, fun aside, one of my favorite and least favorite things about the Discord mailbags is, one, I don't even have to send out solicitations; they just build up. So that's great. That's not a least favorite thing, but people respond and they have such good discussions that it takes me so long to go back through the archives, because there are all these responses happening, and I'm sure I've missed questions that were in there. So I apologize. I try to give all our Discord members, maybe I won't answer if they have multiple questions, all of them, but I try and make sure that I get to, I would say, 90% of the questions that are posted in that mailbag. So I love it and loathe it at the same time, but keep doing it. I don't care that it's a little bit more difficult. I love that you guys are all in there responding to each other's thoughts and questions. Anyway, this Pito question: what's a feature from other sports that you would like to be implemented in the NBA? Some of these were bandied about in the Discord chat. I like the idea of automated replays like tennis. I don't love the idea of automation in general, because replacing humans kind of sucks, but this isn't going to replace referees. You're still going to have the same number on deck. It would just speed up the replays. It would allow you to maybe go about more challenges more efficiently. Would you even need challenges at this point? Maybe it's an example of, you can have a maximum of, I don't know, 2 challenges per half, but you keep them or they carry over if you don't. I do like this year that they allow you, it's only up to 2, but they allow you to keep your challenge if you win it. But the automated replays would at least speed it up. There should be people in the video booths in Secaucus, New Jersey, getting ready to just radio the refs the ruling on it. I feel like that would speed up a ton. Would be really fun. I don't know if I'd love this. Maybe each team can bestow one challenge onto one player who gets to decide whether something's going to be challenged every game, not necessarily on their own play, but in general, so that we can just see, how accurate are players when they're calling for these challenges. I don't know that I'd actually want to see that. I'm just interested. This is low hanging fruit. I love FIBA goaltending, so let's throw that in there. Shout out to Rubik's Gal for this one. I like soccer's idea of playing advantage. If a foul happens on the floor, don't stop the play there. See if the offensive player is able to make the shot. My actual answer here, and I will take the advantage one step further, is when it comes to flopping or complaining technicals, is that there should be a specific, maybe it's 2 minutes, a specific amount of time or specific number of possessions where that team just has to play 4-on-5 without that player, rather than assessing the technical, rather than ejecting them. That's the equivalent of a red card or a yellow card in soccer. It'd be equivalent of kind of like a yellow card, but it's like a penalty in hockey. You have to sit for, like, even if it's just 5 possessions, or if it's 2 minutes or 90 seconds or something. And I think that would cut down a lot of the complaining and the flopping in the league, if you had to put your team at that 4-on-5 disadvantage for X amount of time. I don't know that anyone else would love that, but I thought about that, and it would just be, I'd be very curious to see, like, maybe it only needs to be a minute because I feel like NBA teams they're able to capitalize on 4-on-4. They call 4-on-4 advantages in transition. And so if it's 5-on-4, that gets infinitely more difficult. Or maybe it's if the player gets a flopping technical or that is a complaining technical where they're behind the play specifically, the other team gets to pick a player from the rival team picks a player from that team, the offending players team, that has to be on the court for 2 minutes or something like that. Just some kind of gamesmanship like that. The NBA would never go for it, but I would love to see that happen. That's not in any other sport, but the advantage of 4-on-5, the power play in the NBA, that's certainly from hockey, and I would honestly love I would love to see that. Maybe I'd get tired of it pretty easily, but I would love to see that. Next question comes from Stupid Jerk, who, as I like to say, is anything but a stupid jerk in the Discord. This is a fascinating question, and it's going to be the hook for this entire podcast. You're welcome for the timestamps. How many points per game would Ausar Thompson have to put up to win Rookie of the Year if the rest of his game did not regress? And by the rest of his game, it's the defense and even the playmaking from Ausar. He's been really good at moving the ball, even though he doesn't necessarily have it a ton. So Ausar Thompson is at 11.4 points per game as I record this. Here, there are only 5 rookies who have averaged as much or less in one Rookie of the Year. Mel Hutchins, 9.2 points, and Bill Tosheff, 9.4, tied in 1951-52. Malcolm Brogdon, 10.2 points in 2017. Paul Hoffman, not the NBA, was the ABA, averaged 10.5 points in 1948. And then we had Monk Meineke in 1953 at 10.7 points. When you're looking at kind of the modern era, there's not a lot of guys who have won Rookie of the Year while averaging under 15 points per game. We have Brogdon, 10.2 points in 2017. Amari, 13.5 in 2003. Miller, 11.9 points in 2001. Jason Kidd, 11.7 points when he tied with Grant Hill in 1995. And then we had Mark Jackson, 13.6 points in 1988. Those are all the players, Brogdon, Stoudemire, Miller, Kidd, and Mark Jackson, who have averaged fewer than 15 points during the 3-point era and won Rookie of the Year. Now, I don't like setting the actual just baseline at this is how many points per game you need to average. The ranks are probably more important. And so you look at Brogdon, he was 4th in points per game among rookies in 2017. And I used a minimum of 25 games for the season, just as the cutoff there. Amari was 2nd in 2003 with his 13.5. Miller's 11.9 in 2001 were 3rd, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Ausar Thompson, as of right now, is 5th in scoring among rookies. His 11.5 points per game trail Jordan Hawkins, Brandon Miller, Chet Holmgren, and Victor Wembanyama. And so, in theory, I mean, like, he could kind of trickle down those standings. You have Jaime Jaquez at 11.2, could jump up. And I would also say Keontae George at 9.9 and Scoot Henderson at 9.1. Scoot's only played 8 games so far. Those are players that could leapfrog him. And so if he's tumbling down further, to be in the top 5 of scoring when you're looking at the defensive assignments he's shouldering, the stuff he's doing on defense, just the counting stats, the disruption, but just actually holding his own in these situations, being 5th in points per game is a pretty big deal. And he is shooting, he's at 53.1% from 2. That's fine. 12.9% from 3 is not. Sub 70% from the foul line, not good. 50.32 shooting. That's going to be held against him. And so I don't actually know the specific number that I would pinpoint it. The primary issue for him more than his points is that there are 2 guys in front of him, Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren, who are averaging noticeably more points per game while being just as impactful, if not more so in some situations, on the defensive end. And I think there's kind of value. He's the only one, I would argue, well, now Brandon Miller's kind of done this. So he's not the only rookie, but of those 3, Victor Wembanyama, Chet Holmgren, and Ausar Thompson, he's the only one that's just guarding these top tier perimeter players this consistently, where, yeah, Victor Wembanyama is all over the place. Ditto for Chet Holmgren when the stuff he does on the perimeter, but it's not, okay, go and defend DeMar DeRozan. Just go defend the other team's best perimeter player. And that's Ausar Thompson's job. Like, when you look at just some of the assignments he's covered, I mentioned DeMar. He's been on Damian Lillard. He's been on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He's been on Tyrese Maxey. The Sixers are averaging 0.7.9 points per possession when he guards Tyrese Maxey so far this season. That's a hefty sample relative to the other assignments he's covered. So that body of work matters. The fact that they're just scoring so much more, Wembanyama's at 19.2. And his true shooting percentage is higher for as inefficient as he's been, 52.3. And then you have Chet. I don't want to call him, he's not strictly a play finisher. He's way more than that. His role is a bit more streamlined and he has more talent around him than Ausar Thompson or Wembanyama and better spacing than both those teams at this point. He's at 69.32 shooting and 18.1 points per game. He is your rookie of the year at this point. I know I gave our Discord members some pushback when some of them declared that Chet Holmgren was the rookie of the year a week or two ago. I'm there right now. If the season ended today, it needs to be him. Maybe Wembanyama catches him. I don't think it's that far off just because the role Wembanyama has to subsume. Still, even with, if you want to use that context, Chet Holmgren's just been too efficient, too good on defense. And that's what Ausar Thompson is up against. Now, to answer your actual question, so I'm not copping out, if he could get up to like 13 plus points per game, or if he's third in scoring, like then we can start to have a conversation, especially if his true shooting percentage gets to be in line with or better than Victor Wembanyama's. We can look at his defensive body of work and say, all right, was he the best defender of this rookie class? I don't know that the answer would be yes right now. I think I just look at some of the stuff Wembanyama's capable of. I know a lot of it is highlights, and the Spurs defense isn't good, but he makes I know he's working from a low baseline. He does make their defense a lot better. Some of the stuff, again, that Chet Holmgren has done with the ground, he has covered, makes me a little reticent. But if he can get to a point where he's the best defender in this rookie class and he's top 3 in scoring, and yes, it's Holmgren, Wembanyama. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. I people on broadcast all the time where it's Wembanyama or just saying all these when in mama is what Reggie Miller, I believe, said once. That was something. If Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren are still averaging noticeably more points at that stage, okay, but I think you would probably, just given this rookie class and the two players specifically that he's trying to fight through. And again, what could happen with Scoot Henderson? Because I would expect that his scoring average is going to shoot up when he has more than 208 minutes under his belt. You need to get to, I'll just say 13.5 points per game. Not impossible if they increase his roles. They start to bench other guys since the Pistons suck something awful this year. But I also, if he starts to do more on offense, does he slip on defense because of his responsibility there? I don't see a pathway to him ruining it. I think this is more about how impactful. I still think Wembanyama is, but I think how good of a season that Chet Holmgren is having. He's higher in scoring than you think. You look at the numbers and it's, but he's 5th among rookies right now. And so if he finishes 3rd, I think it maintains this defense and even the playmaking. I do think that it becomes at least a debate. Next question comes from Demos. Oh, this is another really good questions all the time. OKC traded 3 first-round picks for Ousmane Dieng, who they picked before Jalen Duren, only to have him shine the bench and not allow him to play more than 12 minutes on average. Do they still believe in him as a prospect, or have they just admitted they missed the shot? I mean, look, he's in year 2, so I don't know that they've admitted anything there, missing their shot. He is racking up DNPs. He played Tuesday night, but he hasn't played 10 plus minutes since November 1st. He's been in the G League for 3 games where he's averaged 16 points, 2.7 assists, 7.7 rebounds, 2 steals, 1.3 blocks on 47.8 true shooting. He was much better in the G League last year, 59.7 true shooting. I think what we're seeing is 2 things. One, the Oklahoma City Thunder are really good. And so there are expectations to win now, even though they are clearly experimenting when you look at some of the minutes. They haven't all of a sudden decided, and he hasn't been bad, but it's not like, well, we're not going to play Case and Wallace because he's a rookie here. He has played. He's been really good. His decision-making is so quick, and he's great on defense, very plug and play. Or we're not going to play Aaron Wiggins. I think it just gets tough. So you have those immediate expectations. Players that are going through a rough learning curve where it's not Chet, where it's not J-Dub, where it's not Case and Wallace, where they're having this impact while still growing, still making their mistakes. Ousmane Dieng is making a lot of mistakes, and he just sometimes doesn't look like a basketball player. It's like sort of a slowed down version of someone you could tell has feel and could be very versatile and a great decision maker, but it's just not translating. And then the other thing is just that, let's just say he's showing flashes, which he did early on in the season. Finding minutes for him, I'll just say on the wing, you could play him at the 5 if you want. I mean, go ahead, fucking try it. But with specifically Kenrich Williams, J-Dub, and even Isaiah Joe just warranting prominent roles, that's soaking up so many minutes on the wing because you're not going to stop playing Shea. Lou Dort just needs to play. Josh Giddey is playing right now. And again, none of these guys necessarily play the same positions, but we've seen minutes where Isaiah Joe is the de facto 4, where Kenrich is the de facto 5. So you can move stuff around. But those 3 players specifically, because just the equity, I'm looking at it from this perspective, invested in like Lou Dort is just a staple. They paid him already. And then Josh Giddey, they have the draft equity in, and apparently the allegations he gets aren't going to impact his role, at least for the moment. So Kenrich Williams, J-Dub, and Isaiah Joe. Also, J-Dub and Kenrich Williams are 2 players that are going to actually be more official 4s or like in those spots than someone like a Josh Giddey or even a Lou Dort. And so that's why they matter. When you have those guys need to play like really prominent roles, you're not going to have a ton of minutes for Ousmane Dieng. And even if you said, well, we'll use him as the big, you have Chet Holmgren and you have Jay Will, and then you have just some of the smaller lineups you want to play with Kenrich Williams. It's hard just to find those minutes. And so OKC is running into the issue of they're good and it can get hard to play everybody. And the fact that they're good makes it even harder to play everybody because they don't have the same, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. They don't have the same impetus. There isn't the same value in letting a player work through his mistakes at the expense of wins when you're one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the West right now. You have to cater to those expectations. That doesn't mean go out and make a trade, but it does mean we're going to play our best players and the guys who are making an impact. Right now, that's not Ousmane Dieng. I am, if you listen to my appearance on the Uncontested podcast from the preseason or just any podcast in which we've tangentially touched on the Thunder or dove deep on the Thunder, I'm an Ousmane Dieng believer. Whether it happens in OKC remains to be seen. I doubt they're willing to sell low or medium on him now, but if they are, teams should be calling because I just feel like there are stuff I want to see him in Utah. He'd be interesting in Portland. Would he be interesting I don't want to see him in Detroit. I don't want to wish that upon anybody. I won't wish Charlotte or Chicago upon anybody either. But like this is just even on like semi good teams, like throw him on Dallas. I don't know if they would actually play him. But that would be with Luka and Kyrie. I would love, and Grant Williams. I would love to see some of the lineup makeups that they could construct. Hey, throw him to Memphis. Let's get him to play the 5. Indy as sort of flyer. Again, they have immediate expectations. Houston, yeah, throw him in Houston. I'd love to see him there. Orlando is enough just non-shooters at the moment, so that's a no from me. Sacramento, would they consider playing him? Throw him in San Antonio. They would play him. Toronto would play him, but there's just like not a lot of spacing there. I think if I had to pick another team for Ousmane Dieng, my favorite fit would be Utah. And that's maybe bizarre because Larry Markkinen, Walker Kessler, John Collins, Kelly Olynyk, Taylor Hendricks are all there, but you could probably get away with playing Ousmane Dieng with the way that team's constructed as like your de facto 2 or 3. And if it can't be them, let's just say it can't be them, put him in Denver. Yeah, I want to see him in Denver. Like, let's give them another size with a guy who has IQ and see how he develops. And then if it needs to be a team that I know is going to play him and there isn't necessarily a log jam up front, we're getting to some pretty tall orders here at that point. Like, is it just Portland at that point? It might just be Portland for me at that point. Portland or there's Jabari Smith Jr. is there now, Prince Şengün. Yeah. Why is it Indy? Why do I keep going back to Indy? I mean, they have Obi Toppin, they have Aaron Nesmith, they have Jalen Smith's been balling this year, but and they're not playing Jarris Walker at the moment. So yeah, it can't be Indy. What team would actually who has Ousmane Dieng would be a good fit and they would actually play him? Because I don't want to see him in Orlando. I don't want to see him in Chicago if they're going through a rebuild. I don't know. Actually, you know what? If LaMelo Ball was healthy, I wouldn't mind Charlotte. I'm not going to lie there. Maybe we just throw them in Brooklyn with all kind of their like-sized, like-positioned players and see how that works out. Again, I'm an Ousmane Dieng believer. Let's not bail on him just now. Let's wrap up here. And this is actually the last batch of questions I have in my doc from Brian C. Does anybody care about me? If you don't, I guess you could end the podcast here. But Brian C. has a few questions about your job. Going to list a few. Hope some are worth time in a podcast. I specifically copy and pasted these into a doc. Did not prep for them because I thought that would be fun. First one is, if you were told to create the perfect basketball podcast with at least 4 other hosts, who would you pick? No Grant. Sorry, Grant. Who would be your reoccurring guests? Like, Keith Smith for CBA, Sam Vecini for draft, etc. Perfect. So I would pick Caitlin Cooper, and I would force her to talk about the NBA at large because she totally can, even though she claims that she isn't good at it. She's just fucking awesome. Caitlin Cooper, I'll go with Katie Heindel, just one of my favorite writers of all time. And then can Nikias and Steve Jones count as one host? I'm going to count them as one. Oh, all right. So we'll go with Nikias Duncan and Steve Jones. I would just learn so much from them. I'd probably get lost in conversations that they're having with Caitlin Cooper if we all had confabs together. If I'm allowed a fifth because I'm just co-opting the Dunker Spot podcast, Rob Mahoney of The Ringer, who I've actually never spoken or really interacted with, but he's one of my favorite writers of all time. And so that would be my pick. The Dunker Spot, we'll go with five hosts. I don't want to just loop Nikias and Steve Jones together, but Steve Jones and Nikias, Caitlin Cooper, and Rob Mahoney would be probably my dream just podcast. In terms of reoccurring guests, Brian, see, I think you kind of laid it out. Is Grant would have to be, let him come on as a reoccurring guest at least. You won't let me pick him as my host. Keith Smith for CBA or Brian Toporek would certainly, he's already a regular guest on this pod. And we normally have Keith Smith on once a year. Sam Vecini is great for the draft. I do miss Adam Spinella. He now works for the Philadelphia 76ers. He was always my go-to draft resource. So Sam Vecini would be a good one. I do like Jeremy Woo over at ESPN right now. So if we were doing draft stuff for that, and if there's like another just like sort of reoccur, I know I'm going to forget someone. I miss Spinsters. That podcast from Blue Wire. Haley O'Shaughnessy was just super fun. She came on the show a couple times. That would be a good one, but someone who's still podcasting and doing things, just another guest where it's like, hey, let's come on and talk. Who'd be like who's my favorite trade person? First of all, I would love to talk to Howard Beck. I've met in person. He is super nice. Zach Lowe, of course, as sort of a reoccurring guest. But Howard Beck's like his features writing. I wish more companies invested in features writing because he is. I know he's at the Ringer right now, so that's great. Mira Fader would be another recurring guest I would love. Like just every time she publishes a piece on someone who's tangentially related to basketball, going really deep into them, would love to pick her brain regularly. Just so many great writers and podcasters and basketball minds out there. I feel bad not singling out just everybody. And something we need to do a better job of this podcast is having creators on who are relatively new to the game or who deserve more shine. And so look, if you're in our Discord and you want to recommend whether they cover the team or we're always in the market for people who can cover the league at large. And you think that they do a good job covering the entire NBA, DM me. I'm open. I won't always take your suggestions, but I will consider if you have someone who you think is, again, I don't want to use the word lower key because I feel that like that insults them, but you think they deserve to need more shine or an up and coming creator you'd like to see on the show. If you could be a guest on any sports show, which show would it be? I definitely should have prepped for this one. What is what show would I want to be on? Would it be the low post would make me feel like I made it. That's a cliche answer, but all these years in the industry, I'm lucky to be full-time employed. I'm lucky to have been able to host this podcast for so many years. I'm lucky to have been able to do a bunch of cool radio and video and some, low ass level TV spots. But going on the low post would probably make me feel like I just made it. And to have that type of career victory this late, where I think part of the battle in this industry, aside from just surviving and hustling, is if you don't want to move to, and I've done editing. We did the writers program at MBA Math, and we have some people from that program who are absolutely slaying it in this industry, and that's really fun to see. But I've never wanted to necessarily be a manager or an editor. So if you just want to write and analyze, there's just no like leg ups, and victories are just harder to find or measure, at least from my perspective. And so going on the low post would make me feel like I made it. Or what's another, like the most popular basketball podcast would probably be the Dunker Spot. Like if you was ever invited on, I can't keep up even kind of sort of 5% like with what Nikias Duncan and Steve Jones do. But like a podcast like that where it make me feel like, oh, okay, like you've been in the industry for a while and you actually do belong here. If you had to pick one segment for award consideration, what would it be? I don't really understand this part. And which segment do you wish was cut? I don't know. So you're saying which, if I had to make up an award and cut an award, I'd probably cut executive of the year, if that's what you're asking. I don't know that, like, or can we reframe it to give it to entire staffs, or even entire coaching staffs with coach of the year? I think coaches do a better job, not a better job, but it's more recognized as sort of this. It's not recognized as a group award, but there's that staff there. I don't think when you're talking executive of the year that the front office gets like the entire front office gets that same recognition, even though it's very much a group effort. If you had to pick one segment for award consideration, what would it be? Hope you're not talking about a podcast segment. Let's throw out stat padding awards, and then we'll just Kyle Kuzma will win all of them at this point. Um, we don't have. I know there's a most improved player, but we should have like a comeback player of the year award in the NBA. I feel like, and it should be players that are either dealing with injuries or maybe they fell off a cliff and like were able to just sort of reinvent their career. And that latter is just so much rarer when you're talking about a player who reaches a high point, maybe slips off and then works back. I mean, Brook Lopez as a comeback player would be a great example. He's this all-star in Brooklyn, then kind of all of a sudden, like his stock, he's on the Lakers and his stock sort of torpedoes, and he winds up in Milwaukee in the biannual exception. Last year, he's the runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year. So I don't think, does the NBA, like, I'm surprised that wasn't introduced where, like, is there a comeback player of the year award? No, it was 1981 through 86. I wonder why they got rid of it. They should bring it back. So I would absolutely want to see that. Let's look at, does anyone care who the, yes, I'm doing this in real time, who the 7 winners of comeback player of the year are? Marcus Johnson in 86, Michael Ray Richardson in 85, Adrian Dantley in 84, Paul Westphal in 83, Gus Williams in 82, Bernard King in 81, Tiny Archibald in 1980. Let's bring back the comeback player of the year. I apologize, Brian C, if that is not what you were asking. If you had to pick another company to work for, who would it be? Ooh, speaking of another podcast guest, Jason Concepcion I'd love to go on him and Shea Serrano's show because they're both just super funny, but he used to write. Go look at what Jason Concepcion could write at Grantland. I think he did some stuff at other websites back in the day, but he's one of my favorite writers of all time. Also, Google someone, Jim Cavan, Cavan. He used to write Jim Cavan Bleacher Report, Jim Cavan Knickerblogger. One of my favorite writers of all time. Huge influence on me. He was always super nice. When we worked together, we would talk. He was one of the first people who ever followed me back on Twitter. This is years ago. I was in my mid 20s and I was like, oh, this is fucking cool. I still think about him a ton. He's no longer in the industry. So Jim Cavan, Jason Concepcion, would love to have those guys on a podcast, host a podcast beyond Jason Concepcion's anything. If you had to pick another company to work for, though, who would it be? Look, Bleacher Report's one of the biggest sports media companies in the country. I guess I could obviously say ESPN, but I do think that I might say The Ringer. I know not everyone's a Bill Simmons fan, and I don't religiously listen to Bill Simmons at this point. If he has a guest on that I really like, if it's Rob Mahoney or Zach Lowe or Howard Beck now, I check it out. But they employ some of my favorite writers, Mir and Fader, Howard Beck, Rob Mahoney, Michael Pina right now. That's another guy who's, I think he's been on this podcast once, but he's great. They employ a lot of writers that I really respect. And then the other thing is there seems to be an actual investment in Dan Devine, by the way, works for Yahoo Sports right now, used to be at The Ringer. He seems like a really good dude, would be fun to talk to. Going on his show would be a lot of fun. Sorry, where am I going with this? Oh, okay. So even Sirat Sohi, I believe she's at The Ringer, if I'm not mistaken. There seems to be an investment there for whatever you say about Bill Simmons, whatever you say about the company, in longer form content or allowing you to go deep into singular topics, or at least narrowing the scope to where I don't have to write about every single team. Like where me and Grant do a bunch of the collabs, and I know how the sausage is made, and me and Grant have a lot of agency over what we write, which is a pretty big deal in this industry for sure. But to zero in on, I want to write about this player or just this team, I want to write a feature about the Oklahoma City Thunder, and we don't care that it's not going to do a million reads because we're only covering the one team. The Ringer does seem to be invested in that, and I hope to God it's sustainable. And so I'll just name that company because I respect a lot of the writers and a lot of the work, again, the focused work that they're able to put out there. And final question from this, if you could have a sports job, what would it be besides player? I want to be a trainer, not someone who's working on a player's basketball skills, but the weightlifting and nutritional side of it. That is I think anyone who listens to this podcast or for some reason follows me on Instagram, where I really don't post other than my Hardwood Knocks content,
I really am into fitness and amateur bodybuilding. I would love to compete one day. This is my second year. Maybe I've alluded to this in the pod, but I'm going through my like cut right now. And last year I got so thin and gaunt. People were asking me if I was sick. The goal is not to let that happen this year. I love the like way to try these different exercises, build up your strength, or how different movements can impact you. And I love the how nutrition and what you're consuming, how much you're consuming, some of the timing of it can really manipulate or impact your body. And if I was doing that job, I'd be able to have the time to study up more on it and be a little bit more technical about it. And so I'd really love to be like a trainer slash nutritionist for focusing on like the strength trainer and nutritionist side of NBA players. I guess it could be any athlete in general. And if it wasn't that, I would say I would love to be an assistant GM just to get to be one. You're never going to really get any of the credit, but you're not going to get most of the blowback. And then you get to do a lot of the trade calls or at least be in the room for these high level conversations. So it's sort of like you're not paid the big bucks nearly as much as well, I say assistant GM, maybe it's assistant czar of basketball, whatever they're called now, but like the second or third guy behind the guy at the top of the front office is a job that I would like because you get a sense of how everything's working. You're in the know without sort of there's pressure. I want to make it clear, but you're involved without having to be the face of it. And that's sort of anyone who's ever read my piece about when I was dealing with depression in 2021 knows that I want to be great at living in obscurity or anonymity. And so like that would provide, which is stupid as a content creator trying to build up a podcast on YouTube and all the criticism I get for the stuff I write on BR and on social media. So, but that would allow me to do that. I think it would be strength, though, conditioning and nutritional coach for ideally an NBA organization or a set of NBA players. This was a lot of fun. Thank you, Brian, for you maybe even just pretending to care about what I would want to do. Mailbag was fun as always. We went over an hour because this podcast is never under an hour, apparently. Until next time, please remember to rate, review, subscribe wherever you consume us. Tell people about us. Love all the support we continue to get. Appreciate every single one of you. Join our Discord to take that support and the conversation ever further. If you want to join the mailbag, Discord is the best way to do that. But also you can email us hardwoodknocks@gmail.com. Until next time, and as always, leave a shout out to the one, the only Frank Ntilikina, and apologies too, especially after what he did to the motherfucking Clippers on Monday night, Reggie Jackson, and also DeAndre Jordan. Shout out to them for turning back the clock to the Vine era.